Okay. Alrighty. Hello and good day, everyone. Welcome to another Lyngso class. And today we have the part 2 series of Getting to Know Your Soil that was presented last month by Master Gardeners Nancy Kruberg and Nick Landolfi. So welcome back to those of you who attended the first one, and welcome to those who are just joining us for the first time. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy and Nick, and they will start the class.
Hello, my name is Nick Landolfi. I'm a master gardener in San Mateo and San Francisco counties. I'm also a soil specialist. And for 2022, I'm in charge of the new Master Gardener training program.
Great, and I am Nancy Kruberg. I am also a master gardener and a master composter, and I've done some studying with Dr. Elaine Ingham on soils and composting, and love teaching this subject. So yeah, that's all you really need to know about me. So let's get started. So I do want to welcome you to Getting to Know Your Soil Part 2. And Nick and I hope that all of you who attended Part 1 had a chance to try some of the soil tests, and now you know your soil a bit better. For those of you who did not attend, we invite you to watch the recording of Part 1, which is found on the Lyngso website and also on YouTube. This is a basic soil class, and the information here for the most part applies to all soil. There are times, however, when we will talk from our experiences here in the Bay Area with our particular soil types, and you may have a different situation. If you think, though, about the basics, you should be able to apply all the principles to your situation. Last month's goal was to help you to understand the physical attributes of your soil. After today's presentation, we hope that you will have a better understanding and appreciation for the life beneath your feet and the chemical changes that occur in this dynamic environment. Soil is an amazing ecosystem unto itself, but also so crucial to the health of the plants, animals, and people that it supports. We are so glad to have you on this journey as we explore this fascinating subject further. Since this is a Master Gardener presentation, let's talk for a moment about what the UC Master Gardener program is. The UC Master Gardener program is a public service and outreach program under the University of California Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources, administered locally by participating UC Cooperative Extension county offices. Master Gardeners are volunteers trained by UC specialists who are involved in current research and education in their area of expertise. As representatives of UC, we provide research-based gardening information to home gardeners and community organizations in San Mateo and San Francisco counties. Some examples of our programs and projects are a helpline, plant clinics, gardening education seminars, demonstration gardens, and plant sales. If you would like further information, our San Mateo and San Francisco Master Gardener website URL is listed here. Today, Nick will be reviewing concepts from Part 1, then we'll guide you through soil chemistry as it pertains to plant nutrients, pH, cation exchange, and the nitrogen cycle. He will also talk about soil organic matter and why it is so important to soil and plant health. I will then talk about soil biology, starting with the soil food web. We will talk about the organisms involved and how they cycle nutrients and contribute to aggregate formation. This will be followed by showing you how to do some simple tests to determine if your soil has life in it, and tips to keep your soil healthy. Notice that there are several places during this talk where we will take short pauses in order to answer your questions about what has just been covered. In total, our presentation is about an hour and 20 minutes, so we should have plenty of time for your questions. Please put your questions into chat, and Can will monitor that and ask your questions. You will be getting the slide set and the recording after the presentation today. Now, I will turn you over to Nick to get us started.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank all of you for your attention. Let's begin today with a review of part 1 of getting to know your soil. Recall that I told you that soil lies at the interface of 3 physical and 1 biological element. These physical components, the lithosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere, along with the biological component, the biosphere, which includes all soil life, constitutes soil. Remember also that air and water make up about 50% of an idealized soil, with mineral particles making up approximately 45%, and organic material, both dead and alive, comprising a minimum of 5%. Let me stress this is an example of an idealized soil. Soil in different parts of the country or in diverse climates and environments can deviate from these specific percentages, but still be healthy. You now know that there are 3 basic mineral components of soil: sand, silt, and clay. These particles have drastically different sizes, which influences the texture of the soil. You learned that the relative percentages of these components are what determines the texture of the soil. And by determining these percentages, you can use the soil texture triangle to establish the textural class of a soil. Remember that in addition to texture, there is a soil parameter referred to as structure. Soil structure is the spatial arrangement of sand, silt, and clay particles, along with organic matter, into aggregates of various sizes, and the resulting pores and channels between these aggregates. Remember, good soil structure is essential for air and water infiltration, as well as root penetration. Nancy followed with an introduction to the hydrologic or water cycle, emphasizing that soil is an active participant in this cycle. She explained the difference between infiltration, which is external water entering the soil surface, and percolation, which is water moving within the soil, reminding you that if the soil was well structured and void of compaction, water will infiltrate and percolate efficiently. She also emphasized how soil texture influences water infiltration and percolation using this figure that compares water movement in sandy soil, which resembles a vertical column, versus movement in a clay soil, which has a more horizontal component. And finally, she underscored the fact that compacted soil has less pore space and disrupts the equivalent mix of air and water occupying the pore space, which is ideal in healthy soil. Today, we are going to continue and expand our discussion of healthy soil. This slide shows a Venn diagram indicating that soil health requires synergy between the 3 physical soil components we have previously discussed, the lithosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere, the chemical components, which I am going to talk about now, and the biology of the soil, which Nancy will discuss shortly. Let's define soil chemistry. Soil chemistry refers to the composition and chemical properties of, as well as the chemical reactions that occur in the soil. As you might imagine, the proper chemical environment in the soil is essential for the appropriate growth and development and productivity, not only of every plant, but of all soil life. Soil chemistry is important because plants are chemists. Remember that I told you last time that photosynthesis equals life, and that healthy soil allows plants to efficiently photosynthesize. Photosynthesis is a series of chemical reactions that plants use to create energy, And those reactions are represented by this chemical equation, which is arguably the most important chemical reaction that exists. 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O in the presence of chlorophyll and sunlight results in a single C6H12O6 and 6O2. This is the stoichiometrically correct chemical equation. But don't worry about that. Just remember this bottom line. Plants take carbon dioxide from the air, water, mostly from the soil, and then use their chlorophyll to capture the energy from sunlight to produce glucose, a simple sugar, and in that process emit oxygen. The glucose serves as a precursor from which the plant forms other more complex sugars, starch, and even cellulose. These sugars provide the plant with energy. Plants utilize the energy, these sugars, from photosynthesis, along with minerals and other nutrients from the soil, to grow roots, stems, and leaves, and produce flowers, fruits, and seeds. Now, let's discuss specific plant nutrients. There are a variety of elements that are essential for plant growth and development. Their symbols are shown here. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, calcium, magnesium, iron, manganese, boron, nickel, chlorine, copper, zinc, molybdenum. These chemical nutrients can be divided into 3 groups: primary nutrients, secondary nutrients, and micronutrients. It is important to understand that all of these are essential. The designation of primary or secondary does not indicate importance. Let me use magnesium as an example. This is the chemical formula and 2-dimensional structure of the chlorophyll molecule. Let's look at the chemical formula. There are 137 atoms in a chlorophyll molecule. 136 of these atoms are primary nutrients. The single magnesium is a secondary nutrient, but it is as important, if not more so, than any of the other atoms for chlorophyll activity. Look at the 2-dimensional structure of the molecule. Magnesium sits in the heart of the chlorophyll molecule. No magnesium, no chlorophyll activity, that is, no harvesting energy from the sunlight, and thus no photosynthesis. Magnesium is clearly an essential nutrient. Its designation as a secondary nutrient is simply because it is required in amounts much smaller than that required for the primary nutrients. Micronutrients are also essential for the vigorous growth, development, and reproduction of plants and play various roles. Micronutrients provide support for basic plant cell functioning, chlorophyll synthesis and activity, nitrogen metabolism, DNA transcription, and many other processes, but they are simply required in quantities less than those for the primary and secondary nutrients. This slide gives you multiple examples of the roles various micronutrients play in plant growth and development. I won't go over these in detail, but take a moment to look at the various roles nutritional micronutrients play in plant development. Okay, let's stop here and see if we have any questions. Can?
Right now, we don't really have any questions, Nick, so maybe we can just move on and see if there are more questions coming your way.
Let's do that.
Okay.
Now, let's talk about another chemical characteristic of soil that is very important: soil pH. pH stands for potential or power of hydrogen. Soil pH is simply the relative acidity or alkalinity of the soil. Look to the right portion of the slide. The pH scale runs from 1, highly acidic, to 14, highly basic or alkaline. The pH scale is logarithmic. There is a 10-fold difference between each unit. For example, lemon juice has 100 times the concentration of hydrogen ions, as does coffee. And coffee has 1,000 times the concentration of hydrogen ions, as does seawater. Why is pH important for the health of the soil? It turns out that pH of the soil affects nutrient availability to the plant. This slide demonstrates the effect pH has on the availability of individual nutrients to the plant. It may look complicated, but it's relatively straightforward. The x-axis at the bottom indicates the pH range, from acidic to alkaline, left to right. The essential nutrients appear as different colored bars in the graph, and they are divided into the primary, secondary, and micronutrients, as you can see on the left. The width of the nutrient bar indicates the percent of that nutrient that is available to the plant at the indicated pH. That is, as the bar narrows, there is less of that specific nutrient available to the plant. For example, you can see that for nitrogen, it's maximally available between pH 6 and pH 8, and its availability trails off at a pH above or below this range. Look at phosphorus. It has maximum availability in a pH range slightly above 6.5 and slightly below 7.5, as well as above pH 8.75. As you can see, different nutrients have different specific pH ranges where the nutrient is maximally accessible to the plant. Taking this information into account, you can see that a pH between 6 and 7 provides good accessibility for all the essential nutrients. And this is the pH range that is suggested for most plants. Of course, individual plants may have specific preferences. For example, rhododendrons and blueberries prefer slightly acidic soil, while ferns prefer slightly basic soil. But in general, a soil pH close to neutrality is the desired range. It is also important to mention that all soil life, from earthworms to bacteria, require a similar pH range to truly thrive. I want you to understand that most plant nutrients exist as ions in the soil. An ion is simply an atom that has an electrical charge. If that charge is positive, it is referred to as a cation. If that charge is negative, it is referred to as an anion. Most nutritional ions are cations, and on the right of this slide, some of these are listed along with their relative charges. This fact has important implications for how the soil retains and provides nutrients to the plant, and I will provide more details on that shortly. But first, I would like to introduce the concept of absorption versus adsorption. In absorption, the molecules enter the absorbent. Frequently, this is irreversible. Adsorption is the attraction and holding of particles on a surface. This is frequently reversible. This slide visually depicts this difference. Why is this relevant to the uptake of nutrients by plants? Because plants take up nutrient ions via absorption through their roots. These nutrients are available to the plant because they are stored, adsorbed to the surface of particles in the soil. Nutritional cations are stored in the soil, adsorbed to negatively charged soil particles. Remember, cations have a positive charge, so they are attracted to soil particles that have a negative charge. This slide shows how the nutritional cations are adsorbed to the soil particles. How can a plant obtain these ions that are adsorbed to soil particles? Remember, adsorption is frequently reversible, and that is the case here. It turns out that positively charged hydrogen ions can release nutritional cations bound to the soil particles by simple exchange. One or two hydrogen ions can exchange places with the nutritional cation, releasing it into the water in the soil. Once the cations are released from the soil particles and present in the water residing in the soil pores, it is available for absorption by the plant root hairs. It is the plant itself that drives this process. Plants can actively initiate the release of nutritional cations by two mechanisms. The first is based on the fact that plant root hairs have an inherently negative charge and thus attract an excess of hydrogen ions. These hydrogen ions can release nutritional cations adsorbed by the soil by simple exchange, as we have discussed, for absorption by the root. The second mechanism is a bit more complicated, but the result is the same. You know, plants utilize carbon dioxide in photosynthesis, but they can also produce carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide the plant produces comes from respiration, which is the process the plant employs to utilize the energy in the sugars it has produced from photosynthesis. This carbon dioxide combines with water in the soil to form H2CO3, or carbonic acid. This carbonic acid degrades into HCO3- or bicarbonate, and this releases a hydrogen ion, which can then be exchanged for a nutritional cation. A very important characteristic of soil particles is what is referred to as cation exchange capacity. Cation exchange capacity, or CEC, is a parameter that measures the ability of soil to bind and exchange nutritional cations. CEC is measured in milliequivalents per 100 grams of material, but that detail is not really important. What is important is that you understand that soil components have different cation exchange capacities. This table shows the relative cation exchange capacity of various soil components. In this table, I have arbitrarily set the CEC of humus, which is completely degraded organic material, to 100%. It has a high negative charge and can bind large quantities of nutritional cations. You can see how these various soil components compare relative to humus. The higher the CEC, the higher the capacity of the soil to adsorb and exchange nutritional cations. This is why adding organic material, which possesses a high cation exchange capacity, is so important to soil health and fertility. I would now like to talk about the nitrogen cycle. The nitrogen cycle is essential for getting nitrogen, a primary nutrient, into plants. Most of the nitrogen cycle occurs in the soil, So a basic understanding is important as it relates to soil health. You know that the atmosphere is made up of 78% nitrogen, and that nitrogen is a primary nutrient for plants. You also know that plants cannot use nitrogen directly from the atmosphere, that it must be processed into forms that plants can utilize. The nitrogen cycle reveals how this happens. This is a very simple schematic of the nitrogen cycle. I'm showing you this to simply provide a general idea of what we're going to talk about in more detail. Essentially, the nitrogen cycle involves the rotation of atmospheric nitrogen into other forms in the soil that are accessible to the plant and then potentially back into the atmosphere. There are 5 basic steps involved in the cycling of nitrogen from the atmosphere into plants and back to the atmosphere. Nitrogen fixation, nitrification, assimilation, ammonification, denitrification. I will go through each of these, but first let me focus on nitrogen fixation and nitrification. Nitrogen fixation is the process whereby bacteria, either living free in the soil or living symbiotically in the nodules attached to the roots of plants, take atmospheric nitrogen and convert it to ammonium. Nitrification is a 2-step process by which ammonium is converted first to nitrite by one type of bacteria. Then a second type of bacteria converts the nitrite to nitrate. How does nitrogen fixation and nitrification benefit the plant? This slide shows that benefit. What appears in red is a form of nitrogen that cannot be used by the plant, while what appears in green is a form that can be used by the plant. Nitrogen fixation takes unusable atmospheric nitrogen and turns it into ammonium, a usable form. Nitrification takes ammonium through an unusable form, nitrite, and then turns it into usable nitrate. Ammonium and nitrate are the 2 main sources of nitrogen from which plants obtain this essential primary nutrient. Let's talk about the other 3 steps of the nitrogen cycle. Assimilation is simply the process by which plants use available nitrogen to make key molecules like amino acids and nucleotides. Ammonification is where bacteria and fungi degrade organic material containing assimilated nitrogen and release that into the soil as ammonium. Denitrification is where bacteria transform nitrates into nitrogen that is released into the atmosphere. I know this may seem complicated, but I hope the next slide will make the nitrogen cycle more understandable. Here is the nitrogen cycle in a more detailed diagrammatic form that hopefully provides more clarity on this process. For nitrogen fixation, atmospheric nitrogen is taken from the air that resides in the soil. Remember those pore spaces? Soil bacteria, either living free in the soil or living symbiotically in the nodules attached to the roots of plants, turn this nitrogen into ammonium that the plants can use. In nitrification, other soil bacteria convert the ammonium to nitrite, an unusable, unstable form of nitrogen. Different nitrogen bacteria transform the nitrite into nitrate, a more stable, usable form of nitrogen. Assimilation is the process of the plant incorporating this available soil nitrogen into molecules like amino acids and nucleotides that it requires to grow and develop. Ammonification occurs when bacteria and fungi degrade organic material and free that assimilated nitrogen in the organic material into the soil in the form of ammonia. Denitrification happens when denitrifying bacteria transform nitrate into nitrogen that is released back into the atmosphere. This is the nitrogen cycle. Take a moment to appreciate how each of these 5 steps has a specific role in the cycling of nitrogen. While we were on this topic, I'd like to make a point about synthetic fertilizers. If you add nitrate-based synthetic fertilizers to your soil, for example, sodium nitrate, you are indeed adding an accessible form of nitrogen that the plant can assimilate, but you are circumventing a significant part of the nitrogen cycle. And this has significant impact on microbial soil life. This makes these bacteria no longer essential and disrupts the normal balance of soil microbial life. Use organic, not synthetic fertilizers. These feed the microbial community in the soil, allowing them to produce plant nutrition. Finally, I would like to discuss the importance of organic matter to soil chemistry. Soil organic matter is anything in the soil that is or was alive. Sufficient organic matter is essential to healthy soil. You know most of this now, but I would like to review. Soil organic matter contains a majority of the cation exchange capacity, and you know how important that is for making nutritional cations available to the plant. Soil organic matter participates in the formation and stabilization of soil aggregates, and you know how important that is to good soil structure. Organic matter is a source of nutrients for the food web, all the organisms that live in the soil. As that organic material degrades, it produces nutrients. It serves as a slow release nutrients source. Organic material degrades over time, not all at once. So there is a continual release of nutrition. And soil organic material contributes water holding capacity. I want to finish with an emphasis on how important soil organic material is to water retention. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 1 pound of organic matter can hold up to 18 to 20 times that amount of water, providing a substantial soil water reservoir for your plants. That wraps up soil chemistry for today. I can take a few questions now.
Okay, so we've got a couple questions here. First one is, if you buy a bag of soil like potting mix, is it sterile, free of the needed bacteria, and etc.?
My understanding, well, first you should read whatever's on the bag, and quite frequently it will say sterilized. There are ways to amend that, certainly, by adding compost. And in fact, that's something I do whenever I buy any type of bagged potting soil. So I guess the answer to the question is, it's certainly not, if it's bagged, it's certainly not ideal in terms of life of the soil. Nancy, do you have a comment on that?
No, I agree with what you said. And, read ingredients. Sometimes potting soil, they will put, they might put worm castings or something else in it, in which case it indicate there might be some life to it. But generally, whatever potting soil I get, I always put my own compost in with it just to make sure.
Okay, alrighty. So the next question is, how do we know what is synthetic fertilizers And are there natural fertilizers that we can purchase?
Yes, there are definitely. The answer, synthetic fertilizers based on looking at the ingredients in the fertilizer. If there are lots of chemical names, things like sodium nitrate, ammonium nitrate, things like that, then most likely it is synthetic. The fertilizers you can buy that are natural include the things like bone meal, seaweed extract. Read the ingredients. These are things, they still have the analysis, the NPK number, giving you an idea of what nutrient is most predominant. But that nutrient is in the form of organic molecules that needs to be processed for that to become available to the plant. And that's what the soil life does.
Okay. What effect will adding peat, acidic, to the soil?
Yeah, there are a couple of effects actually. In terms of the pH, in general, adding anything to modify soil pH usually has a very short-term effect, except if you're in a very closed container, because these things over time will basically go away and leach out into the soil. Peat, however, is basically organic material. So in that case, you're adding sufficient organic material and you're increasing the fertility of the soil. Now, you may know that peat is felt to be a non-renewable resource, and what people use in place of that more commonly now is coconut coir, which most people, I think, believe is a renewable resource.
Alrighty, so one last question here. What's the function of denitrogenation bacteria?
Okay, so there are nitrogen fixation bacteria and nitrifying bacteria. And then there are the process, I think what you're referring to is the process whereby bacteria, fungi degrade organic material. And most of that degradation product is ammonium. So it's taking assimilated nitrogen from the plant material, from organic material, and making it reaccessible to the plant by degrading it out and providing it as ammonium. So their role is basically to take assimilated nitrogen and make it available again.
Okay, so that would be all for the questions.
Okay, then let's continue. All right, last month we went into details about the physical properties of soil. Nick just shared with you some of the key chemical properties in soil, and now I am here to talk about the biological aspects of soil, or soil life. We will be learning about microbes in soil which you can't see, but let's start by looking at some of the many living organisms in your garden that you can see. Go outside and listen. What do you hear? Then look to see who is making that sound. Let's start with some you may be familiar with, such as insects, like this bee on the orange blossom gathering pollen. Insects are all around us, and most we consider to be beneficial in our garden space. But please keep in mind that the ones you may consider pests are usually food for the ones you want around. So keep your mind open to the possibility of having at least some pests around. In fact, could we just embrace the idea that balance in an ecosystem is beautiful and desired? Look for birds such as this hummingbird who is sipping nectar. or this blue heron who just happens to be on gopher patrol. What about reptiles such as this gopher snake? What a wonderful way to keep the rodent population in check. And who doesn't treasure lizards for their insect and spider eating, as well as for those famous push-ups? All of these animals eat and are eaten by other animals and are also supported by plants. Plants in turn support life in our soil, while the life in the soil supports the plants. The interconnectedness of life is amazing. As Nick mentioned, there are many ways that biology and chemistry are linked together, like in photosynthesis, where plants take light energy and CO2 and convert them to sugars and other substances. These substances are used by the plant as a source of energy and also released through the roots and other parts of the plant. These substances, or exudates, are like cakes and cookies being put into the soil to feed soil microbes. By sending out specific exudates at different points of its life cycle, the plant attracts the microbes, which will provide the exact nutrients it needs at the right time in its development. In most healthy functioning soils, nutrients are in the soil all the time in small amounts. When plants produce exudates and send them out through their roots, this is what it looks like underground. These are known as Rhizosheaths, where most of the root system has soil aggregates attached to it. The exudates feed the microbes, who in turn create these beautiful aggregates from the organic matter and minerals. They protect the plant, they house microbes, and they feed the plant the nutrients that it requires. Did you know that there are more soil microorganisms in a teaspoon of healthy soil than there are people on the earth? These critters that you can't see with your naked eye are constantly at work in your soil, decomposing, eating, and being eaten, producing plant food as well as creating soil structure and humus. If you have seen or rather heard of the term soil food web, that is referring to all these creatures that are seen and unseen, plus the plants. Here is a poster originally done for the USDA by Dr. Elaine Ingham, a well-known soil microbiologist who did the first detailed studies of the soil food web. We have a link to this in the resource section. Let's look at the story this tells. It all starts with energy from the sun, as it shines down on plants, who then photosynthesize this energy and produce exudates. And where are those exudates? Of course, they're down in the roots. And those exudates, again, are the sugars and carbohydrates. The bacteria and the fungi, they are attracted to those exudates down into the root zone, and another name for the root zone is the rhizosphere. The bacteria and the fungi not only feed on those exudates, but they also feed on organic matter and the minerals in the soil. All the elemental nutrients contained in these substances are held in their bodies. When predators, such as protozoas and nematodes, feed on them, the nematodes and protozoa take in the nutrients that they need to do their own processes, then excrete the waste into the soil. The nutrients that are released are now in a chemical form that plants can absorb through their roots, as Nick mentioned earlier. Please notice that the soil food web includes larger animals such as arthropods, earthworms, birds, and gophers, as well as the smaller organisms in the soil, as well as plants. If you see larger organisms such as earthworms, gophers, birds, etc., it means they are being supported by life in the soil. As each one eats and is eaten, the nutrient-rich deposits are cycled in the soil. Now, let's meet some of the critters and go through this a little more slowly. We will start with beneficial bacteria and fungi. Many people are afraid when they hear these words, bacteria and fungi, because they think of these organisms as disease-causing or pathogenic. And it is true that there are some nasty ones out there that make us or our plants sick. However, most are beneficial, and we couldn't live without them. Bacteria and fungi are true decomposers that use enzymes to obtain nutrients from decaying organic matter and from the minerals or sand, silts, and clays in the soil, as well as the exudates from plant roots. They also play a part in creating soil aggregates. Here are some bacteria shown under the microscope at 400 times total magnification. Bacteria produce enzymes which break down organic matter as well as sand, silts, and clays. When they break this material down, again, they hold the elemental nutrients in their bodies. When the bacteria hold the nutrients, they do not leach out of the soil. The nutrients are kept in their bodies until they're eaten by predators. Those nutrients then nourish that organism and the excess is excreted. And now the nutrients are in a form that nourish plants. I think you're getting a pattern here, aren't you? Bacteria contribute also to the formation of microaggregates by gluing sand, silt, clay, and organic matter together. Some bacteria are also nitrogen fixing, as Nick mentioned. Remember, nitrogen fixing bacteria can be free living, such as this Azospirillum on the right. These bacteria usually live in close proximity to plant roots, or they can be symbiotic and need a plant partner, such as Rhizobia, which create nodules on legumes as seen on the left, or Frankia, which partner with plants such as our native Ceanothus. Fungi have roles similar to bacteria, decomposition and aggregation, and some are also symbiotic or mutualistic. What you are seeing in these photos from left to right are a fungal hyphae under the microscope, mushrooms or the fruiting body, and mycelium, which are many hyphae grouped together so you can see them with the naked eye. To decompose organic matter as well as sand, silt, and clay, fungi send out enzymes which decompose these materials. Then the nutrients are absorbed by the fungi. Just as with bacteria, the nutrients are held inside of the fungal body and therefore do not leach out of the soil. Eventually, they are eaten by predators and the nutrients are used by the predators and the rest excreted into the soil in a plant available form. The fungi also use their hyphae to wrap around the microaggregates and use a sticky glue to create macroaggregates. There are many types of fungi, but in the soil, two stand out. The saprophytic, which are the decomposers, and the mycorrhizal, which do decompose a bit, but they partner with plant roots. Both types of fungi are needed for a healthy soil ecosystem. Here is a picture of a plant root with a mycorrhizal association, which you saw last month. What is a mycorrhizal fungi? Myco means fungus and rhiza means root. So together it means fungus root. These fungi either enter plant root cells or form a sheath around the outside of the root. About 95% of the plants form these kind of associations. In the image, the darker yellow portion is the plant root, and the finer, more cloudy area is the mycorrhizal fungi. Notice how much farther the fungi can go to find nutrients and water compared to the area of the plant root. In this plant-fungal relationship, the plant feeds the fungi carbon or sugars from photosynthesis in exchange for other nutrients which the fungi can gather and bring back to the plant. The fungi can also get into smaller pore spaces and can travel further into the soil than the plant roots. Not only can the fungi bring nutrients, but it can also bring water to the plant. Remember from last month that clay soil holds on to a lot of water, but sometimes that water is inaccessible to plant roots. If that plant has a mycorrhizal partner, that fungi can get to some of that water. This is why it is so important to have little disturbance in the soil, so the fungi and plants can work together for the health of both organisms. Imagine what happens to these mycorrhizal connections when you dig or till the soil. Ouch. If the plant dies, the connection to the mycorrhizal fungi is severed, and the fungi will produce spores. These spores will remain in the soil until other plants grow. The new plant will send out a signal through its roots to the spores in the soil, and the fungi will grow out and connect with those plant roots. Now, on the next slide, we're going to watch a video from Dr. Elaine Ingham's Soil Food Web School that shows how bacteria and fungi help create aggregates.
Beneficial bacteria produce sticky compounds, or glues, which make it easy for them to adhere to the surfaces of organic matter and sand particles. These particles then adhere to one another, forming microaggregates. Notice how as things clump together, small spaces are created around them. Fungi also produce some glues, and their long, narrow tube-like structures act like ropes, tying together the microaggregates to form macroaggregates. Now even larger spaces are formed in the soil structure.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that animation. It always kind of helps me to see things in action. The next set of organisms that we're going to talk about are all predators, which play an important role in cycling nutrients. When predators eat the bacteria and fungi or other organisms, they use the nutrients their bodies need, then excrete the rest as, you can probably finish my sentence now, plant available nutrients. Here are some photos of microscopic predators taken at 400 times total magnification. So let's start with the single-celled protozoa. So protozoa, such as amoeba, and here's some testate amoeba, and here's a naked amoeba. They live in aerobic conditions and they mostly eat bacteria. On the right here is another protozoa called a ciliate, and they tend to live in lower oxygen conditions. And although our soils need to be aerobic for plants to function, there are places in the soil that do have low oxygen. These areas are important to support such functions as nitrogen fixation. There are different types of beneficial nematodes. Yes, I said beneficial. Many of you have only heard of root feeding, but we need the good guys, or I don't want to call them good guys. We need the ones that benefit the plants to really help our plants thrive. So nematodes are roundworms. Each one has mouth parts which have evolved to eat certain prey. Notice the bacterial feeder here on the left. And if you can see where I've got the little red cursor, this is its mouth, and it's kind of a cylinder there. It's very straight and it's cylindrical. So this fungus, this nematode eats bacteria. And that's kind of what the mouth parts of this nematode look like. The one on the right here, do you see how it has just kind of this straight, almost spear-like organism here? This is a fungal feeding bacteria. And they both live around the plant roots eating their bacteria or fungi, and they really benefit the plants. And if there are a lot of those guys around, they sort of prevent those root feeders from getting into the middle and getting to the roots. So we want them around. There are also, which I don't have a picture of, are predatory nematodes who actually can eat other nematodes, including root feeding nematodes, which I've heard from some people are their favorite snack. I don't really know though. Another predatory group is arthropods, which include animals such as insects and spiders, as well as centipedes and millipedes. As a group, they eat bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes. They shred organic matter, help decomposition, add nutrients to the soil, and act as taxicabs for other organisms. The smaller organisms can cling onto their bodies. In other words, These animals here may carry bacteria, fungal spores, protozoa, etc. to different parts of the soil much faster than they could travel themselves. No talk about soil organisms would be complete without earthworms. Earthworms comminute or shred plant material to make it easier for bacteria and fungi to digest, excrete nutrient-rich castings, make tunnels for gas exchange, water movement, and root penetration. And they also act as taxicabs for other organisms. Most earthworms in the US are not native, and some can cause problems in forests or your garden. An example are jumping worms. It is worth looking them up so you can identify them if they show up in your garden. And even our garden earthworms can be a problem if they enter older forest ecosystems or hardwood forests. We have put links for more information on these in the resource section. Earthworms that we are most familiar with are welcome in our agricultural systems and our backyards. On the next slide, I'm going to show you another clip from Dr. Elaine's Soil Food Web School that shows the soil food web organisms and nutrient cycling as I was just describing.
How does nutrient cycling work? During photosynthesis, plants combine carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and sunlight to produce simple sugars and carbohydrates. But just like humans, plants can't live on sugars and carbs alone. Fortunately for plants, there's a rich source of nutrients right under their feet in the soil parent material and in organic matter. When dead plant material, or organic matter, falls to the surface of the soil, it's gradually decomposed by microorganisms. Nutrients are then released into the soil in plant-available form. The next generation of plants then absorbs these nutrients, and so nutrient cycling begins again. We humans remove nutrients from this cycle when we take food from our fields, but these are easily replenished when microorganisms harvest nutrients from the parent material, the rocks and pebbles, and the much smaller particles such as sand, silts, and clays. At the molecular level, the parent material comprises large lattice structures which hold nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, boron, calcium, iron, and all the other nutrients that a plant needs. With a balanced soil food web in place, plants can control the nutrient cycling that's happening in the root zone. They invest some of the sugars and carbs they produce during photosynthesis into the soil in order to feed bacteria and fungi. This causes bacterial and fungal populations to increase dramatically. The bacteria and fungi then get busy harvesting nutrients from the organic matter and parent material, absorbing these nutrients into their bodies. Predatory microorganisms are attracted, and they begin consuming the bacteria and fungi. The wastes left behind by these predators contains an abundance of nutrients in plant-available form. These are easily absorbed into the plant roots. So the plant gets a good return on its investment, exchanging sugars and carbs in return for all the other nutrients it requires. This results in well-nourished, resilient plants and in nutrient-dense food for us humans. With a balanced soil food web in place, plants are able to access all the nutrients they need, on demand, simply by varying the compounds they release into the soil.
All right. I hope you enjoyed the video. And even though it looked like the predators are eating all the bacteria and fungi around the roots, in real life, they do not eradicate them. In a healthy soil, everything does stay in balance. I would like you to know that even though plants put out different exudates to attract certain microbes, researchers are also looking into whether microbes themselves influence the type of exudates that plants put out. They may influence each other. Another way for some nutrients to get into plants is the Rhizophagy cycle. It was discovered by Australian scientists in 2010 and has been studied more recently by Dr. James White at Rutgers University. Some bacteria and fungi are endophytes, meaning that they actually enter inside plants. In the Rhizophagy cycle, bacteria and fungi are taken in at the plant root tip. The microbe cell wall is broken down, nutrients are extracted. Then the microbe is put back into the soil through root hairs. As they go out of the root hair, they gain their cell wall, then obtain more nutrients in the soil, and the cycle starts all over. This recent discovery shows again how complex the soil is and how much there is to learn. Now, we're going to be looking at some real soil microbes. All these videos were taken by me at 400 times total magnification, except for the last one, which is 100 times. If you see in here very small objects that look like pinpricks that are circles or ovals that are very smooth on the outside, those are bacteria. And if you see some of those that are more jagged, they're most likely clay particles. All right, here we go on the microscope journey. Okay, so first we're going to look at fungus. And these are fungal hyphae. They look like branches. This brown blob is an aggregate. These are all little aggregates that are forming in the soil. And now we're going to look at some protozoa. You can see one swimming there and another here, and watch in this area. And you should be able to see a big ciliate. Woo! Popped right through. Excellent. And this is a testate amoeba. And here's another little flagellate swimming around. And this is a naked amoeba. This was the first one I ever saw, and it was in a compost that I made. And if you watch this area, you're going to see the little pseudopod sort of oozing out. And then, of course, you can see all these teeny tiny little bacteria floating around, all those little dots. Okay, now this is a rotifer. It's a multi-celled organism, but I think they're just really fun to watch. Again, this is a soil aggregate. Oop, and it flew away, swam away. And then you see it has a bunch of ciliar little hairs where it draws in bacteria to eat, and then it's going to swim away in a minute. There we go. And this last one is a tardigrade. You might have heard them that sometimes they get sent out into space. This little guy was obviously on its back, so I just got the underside with its feet. But it's just one more amazing organism that is found in your soil. All right, hope you enjoyed that. Okay, are there any questions so far? Can, are you there? Oh, maybe you're muted.
Yes, I am muted.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. Okay, so there are a couple questions. So what does the term leach mean?
Oh, really good question. So it means it's coming out of the soil. So a lot of times, like for instance, with synthetic fertilizers, let's say nitrogen, you pour nitrogen into the soil. Some of that will be taken up by the bacteria and the plants, but there is so much of it that a lot of it will just go through the whole soil profile and end up in our waterways. And if you could look it up online if you've not heard about this, but it can cause all sorts of unwanted results in the waterways. So yeah, so you want your nutrition to stay put.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, any suggestions on how to create healthy soil for container gardens? Should I take soil from my yard and try to enhance?
Do you know what? I'm going to wait. Can you ask that question again at the very end? Because we're going to go through all sorts of practical how-tos in a little bit, and it may just get answered there.
Will do. And that would be all for questions.
Okay, super. Well, then let's go on. All right, so now that you know about the micro world beneath your feet, I am sure you are interested in knowing if they are in your garden. So the following, I'm going to show you some simple tests that you can do and observations you can make. But remember that if you are seeing your garden is full of life with birds and insects and worms, there must be microscopic life supporting those creatures. So now let's look at some activities you can do to discover if there is life in your soil. So those of you who attended our talk last month may remember this slide that Nick shared. What you need to remember is that if your soil is aggregated with the help of bacteria and fungi, which produce those glues, it will remain stable in the presence of water and not fall apart. In other words, your soil will still have the pores for gas exchange, room for root penetration, and will still be able to hold on to water. Here is how you perform this test. Select a clump of soil, allow it to dry out for about a week, then gently submerge it in water. Watch what happens. I think many of you will be surprised to find that your soil holds together, meaning that you have soil that is very much alive. And if it just falls apart, you have some work to do. Do your roots have rhizosheaths? Dig up a plant or two, even weeds in your garden. If you see soil clinging to the roots, you can be sure that there are microbes in your system. Those microbes are helping your plant stay healthy. One way to actually see some soil organisms such as arthropods is to use a Berlese funnel. Basically, you take soil, put it in a funnel suspended over a cup, then shine a light on it for a few days. Any organisms that are in the soil will want to get away from the light and will fall down into the cup. For more details on the process, if you're interested, please go to the links in the resource section. If you would like to see the nematodes that live in your soil, then you can use a Behrman funnel. You do need a microscope for this. So if you do have one, or you can convince a friend to lend you one, you may be fascinated to see the nematodes in your soil. Again, please look at the detailed directions in the resource section if you wish to try this. And if you haven't seen a nematode under the microscope, I thought you would enjoy this one. It is a bacterial feeder, and this was taken at 400 times total magnification. So enjoy. And again, you can see he's munching on some bacteria that's around that aggregate up there. That big clump is an aggregate forming. And again, they're roundworms, and they're kind of clear, so they're hard to see unless you know how to work your microscope, and then they're just super fun to watch. And I hope after seeing all those microbe pictures that you realize how alive your soil is, because it really is a fun world in there, but most of us don't see it. All right, so now that we've learned a bit about the many creatures that inhabit soil, as well as how they interact with each other and the non-living elements, you have also learned a few ways for you to look and see what life there is in your own soil at home. In the next slides, we'll talk about some simple ways that you can care for your soil now that you know who lives there. But before we get there, it is important to remember to look at nature for the answer to your gardening questions. How does nature do this? Let's look at some practical ways that we can mimic nature and grow healthy soil. Here are the tools we can use to create natural environments to keep our soil life and plants healthy. Compost and mulch, plants, and thoughtful practices. This may sound familiar from part one, but we will be going into more depth on some of these, so stay tuned. Let's go over each of these. When you want to have healthy plants, there should never be bare ground. In a forest, there is always ground cover, either by a diversity of plants or by leaf fall. When you don't keep it covered, notice what happens. I'd like to point out that these two photos were taken on neighboring lots, no more than 20 to 30 feet apart. Look at the photo on the left where the soil is bare. You often get compaction, soil crusting, drainage problems, and soil erosion or runoff. Do you ever notice what plants come in first when you have bare ground? I hope you thought weeds. That's right. It's nature's way of restoring the land. Those are the only plants that can live there in the beginning. If you can't keep your soil covered with plants, it's best to put on compost and cover it with mulch. One special note about native bees, some native bees need bare ground to nest, so it's okay to leave some space just for them. Let's take a moment to talk about compost and vermicompost. Compost is organic matter that has been decomposed using a controlled, usually aerobic method. Vermicompost is made using worms, and the result is worm castings and decomposed organic matter. For the rest of this, I will be referring to both as compost. So why should one use compost in soil? Compost adds organic matter, microbes, and nutrients to the soil. And all of that helps create good soil structure. Where can you get compost? Well, I'm hoping you make your own, and if you don't know how, please learn. But we've included some resources on how to make your own at home. And hopefully you can find one that fits your gardening and your own lifestyle. You can also purchase compost. We just advise that you know your source and use your senses of smell, touch, and sight to evaluate that compost. Compost should smell earthy and not make your nose crinkle. It should be at ambient temperature, not warm or hot, which would indicate it's not finished. It should be a dark brown color, like 70% dark chocolate, and be crumbly, not necessarily uniform. Another thing to check if you are purchasing compost, the bag should be ventilated and it should be stored away from the sun or excessive heat. Although generally more expensive, buying higher quality compost is better. Check to see what feedstocks were used, and knowing how it was composted is helpful if you can find that information. You can purchase a smaller amount of high quality compost and mix it in with a lesser quality compost and essentially inoculate the lesser compost. We're often asked about free compost given away by cities or waste companies. More often than not, those composts may be hot or a little smelly, so we advise setting it aside and allowing it to finish the decomposition process before using it. To use compost directly, there are two main methods. The first is top dressing, which is laying it on top of the soil. Make sure that the compost does not contact the stem of a plant or a trunk of a tree to prevent rot and keep good air circulation. When you top dress, cover with mulch to protect the compost from drying out and being blown away. Top dressing is recommended particularly if you are adding this to an established bed with perennials. The second way to use it is to dig a few inches of compost into a new garden bed. Mix it in with your potting soil for container grown plants, or use it in a mix to start seeds. Here's a special note about vermicompost. Since it is much finer and more nutrient dense than regular compost, you do not need to use quite as much. Compost can also be applied as a liquid when you make it into an extract or a tea. These two terms are often confused and used interchangeably, so we're going to go over some vocabulary. Both of them provide the plants and soil with microbes and nutrients. Compost extract is a solution made from compost and water and is generally put on soil. Compost tea is a solution made with compost and water that has been actively aerated with added food to increase the number and activity level of the microbes, and is generally used as a foliar spray, meaning used on leaves. UC research suggests that there is no reliable conclusion about the benefits of compost tea, and there are some technical aspects that are too much to go into here today. So we will focus on compost extract and how to use that. Extracts are used on soil to add nutrients and beneficial microbes. When you don't have enough solid compost for an area, extracts can be used to cover a larger area. Extracts can also be used when planting seeds. You can dip seeds in the liquid, then plant, or put extract in the furrow or garden bed and plant seeds right on top. These photos are from an extract that I made, and you can see the microbes that are present. On the top left here is an amoeba, and then here is a nematode, and again, a nice, beautiful fungal hyphae, and these all came out in the extract. we're going to go over how to do extracts on the next slide. And just a note that when you make an extract, you should use it right away. So here's how to make compost extract. If you're using tap water, it is helpful to neutralize the chlorine and chloramine with some humic acid, which comes in liquid or powdered forms in order to keep microbes alive. Our municipal water can contain chlorine and chloramine, which are meant to keep our pipes and water clean, but in doing so, it actually kills the microbes. That is why neutralizing the water is helpful. The photos show how to make an extract using finished compost. From left to right, first put about a quart of high quality compost into a mesh bag, then place the compost into the water. The picture here shows a clear container so you can see what is happening, but you can fill a 5-gallon bucket about 2/3 full of water. Massage the bag while it is immersed in the water for about 1 minute so the microorganisms and nutrients come off the compost and into the water. And it's going to look nice and brown like that when you're finished. Then you put the liquid extract into a watering can and you can just water your soil. The compost you use for the extraction can then be put back into the compost pile to be re-inoculated with microbes or put directly in the garden to add organic matter there. Another important tool in maintaining healthy soil is mulch, which is simply a protective layer of a material that is spread on top of the soil. You may have heard of sheet mulching, which we will address more on the next slide. Mulch has many benefits. It is used to prevent evaporation, protect against erosion, and surface compaction. It moderates temperature extremes, suppresses weed growth, and it feeds soil microbes. It can also add organic matter, which improves soil structure for better water infiltration, better water holding capacity, and better root penetration. Something to consider with mulch is organic versus inorganic. An organic mulch such as wood chips, straw, and dry leaves will give you all the benefits listed at the left. Inorganic mulches such as rocks can give you most of the same benefits, but it just won't feed the soil microbes or supply organic matter because it just doesn't decompose in the same way. We also want to mention that there are rubber mulch products, but we advise avoiding those due to potential toxicity. You can read more about that in the resource section. When deciding which type of mulch to use and how much to apply, you need to know your plant. Think about where your plant grows naturally. Dryland plants prefer less mulch than more temperate plants. Look at their natural habitats. How do plants feed themselves and thrive there? Here are examples of mulch and where you can get them. Wood chips you can get them from arborists, tree services, landscape supply companies, or home improvement stores. Straw you can usually get from a feed store, and leaves, which you can collect or just leave where they fall. They are called leaves for a reason, right? Now, let's talk about how to use mulch. Anywhere you have bare soil, you can cover it with 2 to 4 inches of mulch. You can also use 2 to 3 inches of mulch to cover a quarter to say a half inch of compost to protect it from drying out. Remember again to keep the mulch away from stems or trunks of plants to prevent rot and to make sure there's good air circulation. And no blowers on your mulch as you want it to stay in place. You will need to replace organic mulch when it decomposes, but don't allow it to be blown away before that happens. Now, a brief note on sheet mulching. Sheet mulching is a great way to prepare soil when starting a new garden bed. First, put down a layer of compost over an existing lawn, and then you can put cardboard on top and then another layer of compost and then mulch over that. And all of this must be moistened well and in good contact with the soil. Over time, the microbes in the compost will break down the cardboard and the cardboard will suppress weeds while the soil underneath transforms into well-structured soil. There are much more detailed instructions in our resource section. The next tool to review is plant covers. Cover crops and ground covers are used to protect your soil when other plants are not there. They keep living roots in the soil, which helps break up compaction and feeds exudates to the soil microbes. The roots also add carbon and organic matter to the soil. If you have an area that is not already growing plants, what should you put there? A cover crop is an annual plant that is there to build your soil until you are ready to plant other plants. This is appropriate for a bed where you will plant annuals or a new patch of neglected ground that you want to prepare to plant other more permanent plants. This may also be a good time to sheet mulch and use cover crop on top to build your soil. It is important when using cover crops that you use a mix of plants, and a minimum of 4 plant families is recommended. You must also plant it in the right season. If you are planting in the late summer or fall, they should be plants that grow well in cool weather. And if you are planting in the spring or early summer, make sure those plants grow well in warm weather. And consider plants with different root types. There are plants with fibrous roots for good filamentous mass, tap roots for breaking up compacted soil and opening up larger, deeper channels, and legumes for the nodules that store nitrogen. As for how to use or terminate cover crops, you can cut them down as they flower before seeds form and leave the roots in the soil to decompose there. The easiest method to deal with your cover crop is called chop and drop, where you cut down the plant at the soil level and leave the roots to decompose and leave the above ground part of the plant on the soil. It's like putting mulch there. You can also add some compost extract, which might help things break down a little more quickly. You could also cut the crop down and incorporate it into the soil, or use the material to make compost and put the compost back on the soil later. You can also put in a ground cover, which is a perennial plant or a mix of perennial plants that will cover the ground so it's not bare. And of course, it is meant to be left there. An example of where you might put a perennial ground cover is around your fruit trees or grapevines. You might consider plants that attract pollinators. The ground cover provides pollinating insects a place to live and eat while benefiting the soil and all the plants in the area. Here's a picture from Dr. Christine Jones from Australia, showing a clod, although this picture I think got taken in Hungary. It shows a clod of soil on the left that was from an agricultural field that was tilled for many years. You can see the light color and how little or no aggregation there is. On the right is a picture of roots from a cover crop that was just newly sown. You can see how the rhizosheath on the roots look darker than the clod on the left. Do you know what is making that happen? Yes, I hope you got that. It is the plant interacting with the microbes in the soil. That interaction is actually changing the soil and creating aggregates, leading to good soil structure. This plant is an oat from which was from a 3-way plant mix, which included Phacelia and radish. All 3 are from different plant families. You can see the difference in soil health. In a recent communication I had with Dr. Jones, she mentioned that in the UK, they are seeing great results with a mix of 6 to 8 plant families. I wonder what will work in your own backyard. Okay, we're going to stop again for any questions we might have.
Okay, wonderful. So should I ask that previous question to you again?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to go
I
back.
think I remember, but just say it again in case I don't.
Okay, is it bad to bring plants? Oh, wait a minute.
No, it was about a potting soil or containers.
There it is. Yeah. If, oh, no, my gosh, where am I here? Okay, got it. Any suggestions on how to create healthy soil for container gardens?
Here we go.
Should I take soil from my yard and try to enhance?
Yeah, so what I recommend for containers, I do a little bit, I don't do a lot, so I'll have Nick chime in if he has any more. But I know a lot of trouble people have in their containers is with good drainage. So starting with a potting soil is probably a good idea, but compost is key. I'd say as long as you mix in compost with that, that is what is going to bring the life to that container. Nick, do you want to add to that? Do you know more about containers?
I think what you said is exactly right. Whenever I do something, fill a container, I usually buy commercially available soil mix. You can get these at the, various soil supply places, such as Lyngso. And I will always complement that with some form of organic material, usually compost, which not surprisingly, you can buy at the same place. And so it's, you basically are mixing up your own soil and basically making it a nice combination of, the organic material as well as the minerals and parent rock material.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the biggest problem that I understand with bringing garden soil into container is it's just too dense. And in a garden, your soil has the ability to drain because there's so much room, but in a container, it holds too much moisture. And so you may get a lot of root rot and such. Okay, next question, Can.
Okay, so how far in depth do all the bacteria and critters live? Does it depend on the roots of the plants and trees?
Do you know what? That's a great question. I'm not really good on numbers, but having been a student of Dr. Elaine Ingham, she will tell you they go down amazing a long way. But yes, most of them are going to be right around the root systems because that's where all the action is happening. So however deep your plant roots go, whether it's 12 inches, 18 inches, whatever, they are going to be mostly there. But they have found microbes incredibly I want to say if I heard a mile or more down sometimes. I mean, these are scientists drilling down for our own home gardens. It's not going to be like that, but they can be found extremely far down. But yes, it's going to be mostly in that active layer where all the roots are.
Okay, great. So the next question is it bad to bring plants in from outside for the winter? Or am I bringing in a whole bunch of problems with it? Should I repot the plant in potting soil?
Oh, I guess it depends. So I don't do that, but I don't have finicky plants. But so I know there are times when people are growing plants that are not necessarily plants that would grow year round in this area. So in that case, I guess some people bring it in. I don't know specifically what you're talking about, nor do I know if I know that answer. But I do know that, there are people that, but it's usually they'll be in pots outside that they will bring into shelter for the winter. Nick, do you have any experience with this?
Not really, but I think that my recommendation would be to not really disrupt the plant at that point. I wouldn't bother repotting it. What I would do then is when you move it back outside in the spring, I would supplement the soil at that point. I mean, what I commonly do with my pots to stay outside all the time is once or twice a year, I'll remove the mulch that's on the surface. I'll try to work in some compost and then replace that mulch, just so there's kind of a constant addition of, new organic material to the pot.
And it sounded like this question was they had it in their garden and was thinking about transferring it to a pot. So, if you're worried about it making it to the winter, it might just be adding extra mulch to make sure the soil around it, so it stays warmer and more cozy for the plant, depending on what it is. Okay, next question. Let's take maybe one or two more and then we'll go ahead and finish.
Okay, there are a few more here, but I'll ask you this. So any issues with adding compost that had not been completely decomposed or cured?
Yes, do not do it. Please don't. Yeah, because what it's going to do is take the nutrients away from your plants, because all those microbes are really busy actively decomposing. So you want to make sure that it is finished, and by finished, you'll know by the temperature. Like if it's still if it's still warm, the microbes are just completely active. Once it's cool, yes, the microbes are still eating some of it, but that's kind of the natural process that would happen in the soil. So as long as it's cool and it doesn't have a funky smell to it, use it. If it's warm and if it has a funny smell, it means it's gone anaerobic. There's not enough air in it, and you would want it to you kind of want to spread it out and let it not smell anymore, and then you can use it, because then by then the aerobic critters will have gotten back in. Okay, you know what? I think let's go ahead and finish, and then we'll take the rest of the questions at the end, okay?
Sounds good.
All right, thank you. All right, so our final section is about thoughtful practices. In healthy soils, there are dormant weed seeds and pathogenic organisms waiting to come to life when they are needed. They are needed when the soil and our plants are not healthy. Because remember, all these guys are there to kind of take out the dead plant material. Think about what our world would be like if there weren't garbage men out there, right? So something's got to take care of the plants that are not healthy. So pathogens tend to consume those unhealthy plants, and they thrive in soils that do not have good structure, and therefore they have poor gas exchange. Your garden practices will make the difference between growing a healthy garden or one full of weeds and disease. So first, limit your digging. It was once thought to be a good practice to turn the soil over and make it loose for planting. Nowadays, we know differently. Digging breaks up fungi and causes all that beautiful structure that had all those pore spaces to collapse. Remember that those aggregates are homes for microbes, so be gentle. When you have a new bed, sure, dig in compost, but for mature beds, use compost, leaves, straw, or wood chips as a mulch on top of the soil, as a top dressing. They will slowly decompose, as mentioned earlier. It is okay to dig holes to put in transplants, and little bits of disturbance in the soil is fine. Just don't dig up the whole bed, and certainly don't do that regularly. Rather than digging and turning over your soil, you can use a broad fork, pitchfork, or garden fork to loosen the soil a bit without destroying the soil structure. When you do this, it provides space for your compost or extract to move into the soil. The idea is to put the fork in the ground vertically, then pull back on the handle to slightly lift the soil. Move back another 8 to 12 inches, then do it again and repeat. On the next slide, you will see this in action. Okay. When you take out annual plants, cut them off at or just below the soil line and leave the roots in the soil. As they decompose, they will feed the soil life and leave channels for gas exchange, as well as water and root penetration. You are also adding organic matter to your soil. Pesticides are intended to kill living organisms and will usually kill more organisms than the target one. It is important to use integrated pest management, or IPM, strategies, which means using the least toxic methods first. Understanding the situation using a bigger picture is imperative by always asking, why is this situation occurring? Often it is your management practices that need to change so that your plants are healthy. Healthy plants can fight off disease and will deter most pests. Synthetic fertilizers are salts and single nutrients which throw off the balance of the soil food web and even the pH of the soil. When big shots of nutrients are dumped all at once, Some of them are absorbed by plants or by microbes, but much of this flows right through the soil profile and can end up actually polluting watersheds and affecting the bay or ocean ecosystems. When you put synthetic fertilizer on your plants stop interacting with the soil food web to obtain those nutrients. For example, when nitrogen fertilizer is given to a legume, a plant in the pea family, then the plant will stop feeding the nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So the nitrogen-fixing bacteria stop fixing nitrogen. So now this natural process is disrupted. It is similar when you add phosphorus. The plant will not feed the phosphorus solubilizing bacteria that naturally obtain phosphorus for the plant. These bacteria are also responsible for stimulating the growth of nitrogen-fixing bacteria, another disruption in the soil food web. When the population of microbes diminishes, then you start to lose soil structure and your plants become dependent on soluble synthetic fertilizers to grow. You will need to continuously supply these nutrients. So can you see how synthetic fertilizers disrupt the natural processes in the soil? If you are using synthetic fertilizers and wish to switch to a more natural approach, you can switch over by decreasing its use and weaning plants off while nurturing and growing the soil food web until you're ideally using only small amounts of compost to feed the soil food web and keeping a diversity of living plants in the soil. If you find it necessary to supplement with synthetic fertilizers, then be sure to only use the recommended amount on the label. In this case, more is not better. Blowers. Blowers blow off topsoil and mulch, and it compacts the surface of the soil. When the surface compacts, water and air cannot get into the soil. It is fine to use blowers on hard surfaces. If you were with us last week, you remember things to remember. So we're going to see if you can remember some of these things. So here's the first question. How do you know if microbes are living in your soil? Can you think back to some of those things? Just think about it in your head. Okay, here were some ideas that we had talked about. You'll know that it's there if you have earthworms, sow bugs, insects. You might see the rhizosheath on your roots. A clod of soil will stay together in water, proving that you've got microbes. Or you might use a Berlese or Behrman funnel. Is it okay to dig in your garden? Yes, of course it is, but don't do it excessively as it will break apart the soil critters' homes. Now, do all nematodes eat roots? Do you remember this one? No, some eat bacteria, some eat fungi, and some eat other nematodes. Is there just one way that plants get their nutrition? Do you remember this one? No, there are several ways, including partnerships with fungi, exchanging cations, and the Rhizophagy cycle. So here are some final thoughts. Your soil is a living ecosystem where living organisms influence and are influenced by chemical processes and interact with the non-living components. Soil is a habitat where food, air, water, and shelter is available for the living organisms. Treat it respectfully and nurture it. In return, your garden will thrive and nurture you both physically and spiritually. Here are some books and websites that you might look at to learn more. And here are some additional resources. And again, you'll all be getting this later on. And thank you to Can and Lyngso Garden Materials for hosting us today. And thank you also to the Soil Specialist Group for supporting this presentation. If you live in San Mateo or San Francisco counties, please contact the Master Gardener helpline listed here if you have any questions. And if you don't live here, then look up the Master Gardener program in your area. And thank you to all of you for listening to our talk today as our nematode wishes you goodbye. And now please go ahead and ask your questions. I think we still have time. It's not 3 o'clock yet. Good.
Alrighty, so we'll go back to the questions here. So this is regarding the compost extract that you were talking about.
Yes.
So why would you need to use that extract right away, and what happens if you don't?
So it is best just because everything's fresh and alive. And if you leave it there for too long, number one, not enough oxygen will be in there to keep the microbes alive. And eventually they'll also run out of food. So that's why it's best to use it as soon as you can. It can, it can sit around for a couple hours. It's going to be fine, but don't leave it there for a day or two.
Okay, great. And this one is a really good question. So do you find that municipal compost and mulch contain lots of plastics?
So it can. So you need to find out what goes into it. Like, so for instance, the waste companies that only pick up like yard debris, you're probably pretty safe that there won't be plastics in it. But if you pick it up from places where there are food scraps put into people's bins, people are really bad about taking the plastic out of there. So yeah, so that's the unfortunate side, because I applaud the cities and counties that are doing this great job of composting our organics, but yeah, you kind of have to watch that. You can pull them out if you want.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem, and especially with microplastics too.
Yes, yeah.
Really, really hard to eliminate, and it just sort of takes everybody to make it right. But
yep, that is true.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question is, this person usually agitates their extract with a bubbler, but if the sun doesn't shine, it's not really agitating it because it's solar. And they're wondering if that's a problem.
So yeah, so you're making more of a compost tea. And if you're doing a tea, yeah, you want to bubble it. I don't know if that person's adding food. Normally when people make teas, they add a little bit of food, so it's making organisms grow. And the problem when the bubbling, if you've put food to make them grow and you've added air, which gets them excited and ready to eat, you're multiplying your population of microbes. And the problem when the air stops is that they will run out of oxygen because they're so busy and they're using up so much oxygen because they're eating and multiplying, right? That eventually it may actually go anaerobic, and you may get critters in there, meaning microorganisms in there that are anaerobic that actually would not be good for your soil.
Alrighty. So this one, I'm just going to put the resource, suggest a good blend for local California garden cover crops. I'm actually going to put the Putnam Sisters talk link for that particular one.
Good. Do they have that California cover crop?
I think so. Yeah.
It's probably the one I use. So that's great. I'm glad you have it. Thank you.
But Nancy and Nick, you're more than welcome to answer that question if you do have some suggestions. Yeah, no, the biggest thing I would say is, use that. That's such a good resource, and I use it too. The most important things is to remember to do different plant families. I rewatched Christine Jones, which is why I reached out to her asking her if I could use that picture of her soil clod and all, but she's saying now she likes a minimum of 4 plant families will do the best for your soil. But the other thing is people do forget, and I know I mentioned at the top, and I'm going to say it again here, is remembering to use the right plant in the right season, right? So, because if you're using a cover crop seed that wants heat to grow and you plant it now, it won't grow. So just pay attention to that. But yeah, Ken, if you can put that in the link, and then it's super helpful. And there are many places where you can go to
to find the seeds. Even for gardeners, a lot of them are doing for ag, but I remember I just planted a cover crop here, and I had to go like 2 or 3 different sites, but I finally got all the seeds I wanted.
Okay, fantastic. So the next question is, what type of material is best for the extraction bag for compost solution?
Okay, so science-wise, you need something that has a 400 micron sieve or area, but you don't need to get that complicated. You could simply go to a store and get a paint strainer bag, and that should be adequate.
Okay, alrighty. So would steer manure be good compost to put on cardboard for sheet mulching?
So, so you said 2 things. So I'm just going to say what's in the top of my head right now. You said steer manure and you said compost. You did not say composted steer manure. So if you meant just straight steer manure, no, manure should always be composted first. If you mean composted steer manure, it should be fine for that purpose, I would think.
Okay, next question.
Although I have to say I have a bias toward compost that has a mix of materials, but you know, it should work.
Okay, alrighty. So how about the fire risk of organic mulch? Survivor of woodland urban interface fire. So maybe for that one, I'm going to refer to the firescaping class.
Great.
And there's a whole talk on organic mulch. So, but if you both have.
Good, because I would not be able to give good advice on that one.
Okay, alrighty. So I'll throw that up. It's also
Perfect.
under the recorded classes link under professional resources on our website. Okay, so the next question is, is there anything beneficial about snails?
There always is something beneficial about every creature. So you're right. Well, yes, they are food for other creatures for sure. Like when my chickens and my ducks over the years, I don't have ducks right now, but they like them as food. So you're right. That would be a good one to look up to see, but you know, every critter really does have a role. So you just, need to find out what it is, because I really do personally like figuring out how to live with the good and the bad and the ugly, and try to figure out, just how it's all connected. I wish I had a good answer. That I might have to write that down, look up snails and benefits. So I don't know. Nick, do you know anything about that?
Not really, but in my experience, things really only become a problem when they're kind of out of balance.
Thank you, Nick.
As
Good.
long as everything, is working right. I know that, in the past when I would grow broccoli and cauliflower, I'd have a big problem with caterpillars. And then, I got more birds in my backyard, and now I really just don't have that problem anymore. So I think if things are in balance.
So Nick, you brought up a good thing. I have one in my own yard where one time I put, I don't know, 2 or 3 broccoli plants, and one just got munched by aphids, and I went, by golly, I'm going to stick by my principles, and I left it alone. And that plant didn't do that well, but the other plants survived really well. And, eventually bugs came and ate, and I lost one plant, but the other 2 stayed healthy. And I was really happy with that results, because I really don't like messing with nature. But yes, as long things need to be in balance, and you take it as it comes with critters.
Okay, fantastic. Going back to steer manure, this is a question regarding horse manure. Are there any issues using horse manure? I heard that horses' diets have lots of salt.
So any animal that is eating like pelleted food or processed foods is going to have a lot of salts in it. So I think you could still use them, but you might not want it to be like the bulk of your compost. It would use some of it. The other issue with horse manure can be like right after deworming, because it's to kill microbes, right? You might want to wait a week and then take manure from that horse. There is some evidence that some of those wormers do decompose in the composting cycle, but I don't know that all do. So if I use horse manure, I'm just really, I ask, you know, when did you last give wormer? And then just, as I say, wait at least a week before you take it. So that would be the other issue.
Actually, I have a great talk on all about horse manures that Tracy from Web Ranch did for us, which is a horse manure based compost. So I'll throw that resource up on the feed as well. So it's another recorded class. So feel free to watch that. Okay, so next question is, what is the difference between compost tea and a compost extract?
Good. Okay, so a compost extract is simply, you're just releasing the nutrients and the microbes from the solid material, and you're massaging it enough to release that out of the water, and that's all extract is. So when you're ended up, you've got some nutrients and you've got microbes. Okay. When and again, and that's why that's good for soil, because you can put it in soil, it'll sink in the soil. Great, plant will be happy. With the tea, what you're doing is you're adding a little bit of food. Usually you're adding fungal foods to grow out fungus, but it also, you know, the bacteria and the protozoa, everything is going to be multiplying because you're adding some foods and you're bubbling. When they're so active, particularly the bacteria and stuff, they will get more glues on them. So that mixture, the tea, when it's finished, is great for spraying out, because it will stick to the leaf surfaces and the stem surfaces better than an extract will. And but since I've done teas, but I just find extracts are easier. And frankly, I've also put extracts on leaves and had some good results. You know, this is anecdotally, this isn't with my master gardener research, because the research from UC is that teas are, you know, they find some good, find some bad. They can't decide whether it's good or bad. They are very much for extracts. So take that as it is.
Alrighty, so I think we have time for one last question here. How often should you add compost to your raised garden? And is it good to do the compost, cardboard compost, meaning AKA sheet mulching,
right,
to raised garden for cold winter climates?
Why not? Yeah, I mean, sheet mulching you can do in lots of areas, you know. Yeah, I mean, I usually just put on a raised bed, I would normally just put compost and mulch just to you know, keep it up is a, you know, the end of this season. And I, you know, may have, because in my beds I have some perennials and then places for their annuals, and if I'm not quite ready to put a lot of plants back in, yes, I'll do compost and mulch. I think for sheet mulching, I would do it if like I was having a big weed problem, and I wanted to kind of squelch that a little bit, because it would make better soil structure and it might also smother some of the weeds. It kind of depends on the situation.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I like to add compost at least twice a year to my garden.
Sorry, that was the first, and that's exactly what I do. I forgot the first part of the question.
That's okay. I was getting there. So it's really sort of depending on what you're growing, right, at that point.
Yeah, I was gonna say I generally do it spring and fall, but every now and then, if I've got some compost around and I see a little plant that I think needs a little boost, I'll put a little bit around the top, you know.
Okay, perfect. So I think that does it for all the questions for today.
Great.
But thank you, Nancy and Nick, for a fabulous class yet again. And any closing remarks?
Not at all. Just thank you so much for everybody for coming here. And I go love your gardens and love your soil. And remember, it's all alive. So take good care of it. And Can, thank you for having us.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you to everybody that attended today's class. And as always, this will be available under our community resources. So we'll see you again for one of our other Wednesday classes. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.